A couple of days ago, the Tibet Policy Institute has published its annual journal, the Tibet Policy Journal, in two languages, in English and in Tibetan, in which the researchers at the Tibet Policy Institute and interns have written articles touching upon various topics. Today we have with us Dr. Tenzin Desel, a research fellow at Tibet Policy Institute, who has also edited this year's English Tibet Policy Journal. Desla, could you tell us briefly about the overall content of the journal?
Right. Well, first of all, I think let me just introduce how this journal came about. So basically, we have been publishing this journal for over 6 years, and this is the 6th volume and number 2 of this edition. So generally, we publish 2 volumes in a year. So one is in Tibetan, and the other one is in English. And so the content is varied in a sense that we have touched upon many different subjects in this volume. So you have articles on history, you have articles on rehabilitation policy of 2014, and on China's management of Tibetan rivers, and on cyber laws that, what kind of policy China is implementing in terms of managing cyber security in China and beyond.
Right, then let's begin with Tenzin Desel's article about cyber security and how China is trying to intrude into exiled Tibetan community and its cyber war, right? What is your take on this?
Right. So I think initially I can extend a disclaimer by saying that this is my reading of the article. So basically Tenzin Desel's article is he's looking at the ways by which China is implementing many of the cyber activities transnationally, especially on Tibetan communities living in India. For instance, disruption of communication channels, and how China is actually working by ways with which they can disrupt beyond their borders. And he has been interviewing many staff members within CTA, and he's actually he's arguing that China is actually involved in many of these disruptive ways by which they have been effectively acting transnationally in terms of cyber internet policies.
Right, there were a substantial number of data that Tenzin Desel has collected regarding this, right? So let's move on to Tenzin Dessel's article, the very much talked about Tibetan rehabilitation policy of 2014. There was a lot of expectations from the Tibetans who are predominantly settled in India. So, and I believe that there has been an assessment of this sort in one of the earlier journals also, right? What is your assessment, and what does Tenzin Desel write about?
So basically, like you mentioned, we have this, in earlier volume of this journal, we have this publication regarding this policy where the author looks at this through a Foucauldian perspective of how this one is actually one of the disciplining projects. But in this context, Tenzin Desel looks at the ways by which, looks at the way by which concepts developed by Arendt, and so she's basically asking questions how this policy is involved in resolving questions surrounding legal rights and land rights of Tibetans actually living in India. And to her, she argues that this has not yet been resolved.
Right. Okay. And then right now, recently, there was this huge flood in the eastern Tibet, and so regarding this article, when I saw Dechen Pemmo's article, this came to my mind. So she writes about the equal water distribution among the countries that were located downstream of the Mekong River. What is it?
So basically, as we all know, that Tibet is actually, it is dubbed as the third pole. And the water emerging out of Tibet, flows to many other different countries. And she looks at this particular river that flows from Tibet to China and then to Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. And then they have this mechanism to actually equitably share the water in this region. So it's called the Langkang Mekong Cooperation. Now she's looking at the ways by which she's actually arguing that this mechanism, whether it is actually helpful or whether this is going to be another mechanism by which this can be used as a tool to exert China's hegemony in this region.
Right. And another important article, a written piece by Tenzin Desel, where he talks about the narratives of the 17th century Tibetan Muslims, right? How do you find it?
So basically, the argument he's making in this paper is basically drawing, he's trying to carve a narrative for the Lhasa Khaje community and how they came about and became a cosmopolitan fabric of the Lhasa in 17th century, and then how they come into exile and their narrative of the history. So he basically is trying to carve a narrative. To my mind, he's basically trying to carve a narrative for this people, which is often neglected in terms of writing broader history.
And then Sri Kalden writes about singing nun, right? The singing nuns of Tibet, from language of Buddhism to language of protest. What is this about?
So Tibetan protest, you can look at it from various different perspectives. And what is unique about these Tibetan singing nuns is that they are women and they are nuns. And often once we think about resistance, we often think about man and masculinity involved in it. So what is interesting about her article is she explores the roles of nuns in resisting China colonial occupation of Tibet. And as we're all aware of the songs that are smuggled out of Tibet, you know, sun rising out of the clouds, all these famous songs, and she's looking at the ways by which, you know, how the songs are necessary and important in resisting China's rule over Tibet, and what kind of hidden transcript, as James Scott once used to call it, you know, what kind of metaphorical allusions they're making in terms of expressing their resistance. Obviously, you cannot overtly resist China's occupation these days because you are at the risk of receiving reprisal from the Chinese government. But how, in subtle ways, Tibetans are resisting, and this could be done through songs, this could be done through art, so the creative process through which resistance could be asserted. So this is, so she's actually arguing that Tibetan women, and more so Tibetan nuns, are actually engaged in resistance. So she's looking from a power position she's looking at the resistance through a gendered lens.
Right.
So I think this is quite unique and a wonderful contribution in studying Tibetan resistance and the development of scholarship of Tibetan women's resistance.
That's very interesting, where the gender lens comes into place, where she gives them, a femininity of there is a female voice in the struggle of Tibet, right? And then there is a book review of Tenzin Desel, right? How does he approach this book? It's about the Panchen Lama.
Yeah, so this is extraordinary character in modern Tibetan history. So we're talking about 9 Panchen Lama. And he was, there are quite a lot of publication over the years discussing how many of these characters, so you have Chinese pilgrims coming to Tibet in early 20th century and late 19th century. So you have Chinese coming to Tibet and studying Tibetan Buddhism. But what is extraordinary about this character is that he went to many regions in China. He was involved in teaching and reviving Tibetan, sort of introducing Tibetan Buddhist culture in many of these regions. So, this extraordinary character at the cusp of calamitous changes, which is going to happen. So this biography written by Fabien Jagoux, which was initially written in French and translated into English, maps this extraordinary character, and Tenzin Desel sees this one, how this book is a wonderful contribution in understanding one of the figures of modern Tibetan history.
Right, and last but not the least, your piece, and you have written, who do you think you are, your identity, ethnicity, and strategies of expression of Tibetan nationalism in People's Republic of China. So it's your piece, and
I can speak for myself.
Of course.
Yeah.
What is your main argument?
So basically, we have recently acquired a sizable collection of works that was published in the People's Republic of China in Tibetan language, and among one of the accusations is the collected works of Muge Samten. So Muge Samten is this, he is regarded as one of the great scholars of Tibet, one of the 3 great scholars of Tibet, Pöge Kebasum. So in his collected works, I came across these 2 essays, which was basically his sort of argument regarding this classification of Burma Tibetans, so quote-unquote Burma Tibetans, as a different ethnic group. So this essay was quite extraordinary because, you know, if you look at the Chinese state discourse on ethnicity, you know, this, so they think that, you know, in terms of that, they have 56 ethnic classification and 55 national minorities, and of course the 56 being the Han. During this process of ethnic classification of Tibet, this project that began in the 1950s, where ethnographers and political scientists and linguists, many of those people who were involved in classification of people, whether as Tibetans or as Hui, so this classification project was deeply political. This is what I'm trying to argue in this essay, was deeply political argue. And I need to locate this great scholar, Mugesante, as somebody who is a vernacular cosmopolitan intellectual. This is what I'm trying to argue, that somebody who is not only a vernacular scholar who can argue and articulate in his own language, but at the same time he's aware of many of these other Marxist classics, so he's aware of what kind of Marxist-Leninist approach to nationalities. So he's somebody who's actually involved in it. And this essay, this became very deeply political at a time. Even somebody like Fai Shidong, he was this pioneer of sociology in China. So they were able to drag him into the discussion. And Mugesante, he employs his scholarship to actually resist this classification of Burma Tibetans, quote unquote, as separate ethnic group, arguing that they are Tibetans and not separate ethnic groups. So in order to do that, he has to marshal evidence, drawing from classical Tibetan literature. So you can think of Gyalab Sebe Melong and many other extraordinary, many other important classical Tibetan historical texts. So he draws on them, and then he draws from his own ethnographic knowledge of those people in terms of dispute management and on how these people were actually, the etymology of topography and the ethonyms of these people. So I'm trying to locate this person and try to see how he is important, not only to create a discursive, to subtly resist the Chinese classification of Tibetan people, but at the same time he is actually subverting many of these state discourses on ethnicity. So this is one part of the article.
Right, so the having an idea of ethnicity and identity even during that time is remarkable.
Yes, it is not only remarkable in that sense, but it is extraordinary in a sense that somebody like characters, many of those characters who were involved initially to bringing Marxist ideas into Tibet, so they were involved in translation of many of these ideas into Tibetan language, but at the end of the day, well, eventually what kind of intellectual response they were giving to the state discourses on ethnicity. And the next part is how strategies of expressing Tibetan nationalism. So how do Tibetans do that? For many Tibetans, you know, as Hans Renan, when he was discussing what is a nation, he was talking about this trauma being an important cohesive forces that can bind people together, and then creation of this imagination as a nation. So what I'm trying to do with the second part of the article is trying to look into the scar literature in modern Tibetan literature. So of course, in Chinese, modern Chinese literature, there's this huge genre of literature which is basically the expression of scars during Cultural Revolution and during many changes during Great Leap Forward and all these places, expressing those
Chinese nationalism.
Not necessarily, in the sense how state violence has actually affected the people and the expression of their scars. So we have in Tibetan this genre of Tibetan literature called Makha Ki Zomrik. So basically it's this expression of scars that is retained among the people. So I look at scar literature in Tibetan language, so I look at them and how this could be a form of an expression of Tibetan nationalism. So as with Tenzin Kalden's article, there's this discussion about how creative ways through which, you know, some sort of an expression could be given. So I look at the modern Tibetan literature, especially the Scar literature and expression of Tibetan nationalism. So there's this extraordinary poetry about how you have China. So of course, this is not done overtly, not saying that China, you have done this, done that, but this creative ways through which they're saying that, okay, this is what has happened to us, and this is what I'm trying to explore in this part of the article.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Desel, for giving the insights into all these wonderful, remarkable articles that were written in the Tibet Policy Journal. That was a very informative and educational conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Tenzin Desel from Tibet Policy Institute. Thank you for watching Tibettv.